Dr. Voltra hated financial analysts almost as much as she hated paperwork, which was unfortunate because the two frequently traveled together. A financial analyst could spend months constructing an argument, bury it beneath enough charts and projections to qualify as architecture, then deliver it directly into her inbox where it became her problem. Paperwork at least had the decency to admit it was useless. Analysts always seemed convinced they were helping. The report hovering above her desk had been written by one such analyst. Voltra had spent most of the morning reading it, rereading it, and repeatedly arriving at the same conclusion. The numbers themselves were not wrong. That was what made the document so offensive. Every calculation was technically accurate. Every chart was technically accurate. Every projection was technically accurate. The report simply relied upon assumptions so detached from reality that the final conclusion became nonsense. According to the analyst, Rose's rehabilitation costs might exceed her future value to Kelvar nutrient systems. Voltra found herself staring at the sentence again while wondering whether stupidity qualified as a pre-existing condition. Rose's personnel file remained open beside the report. 8 years of employment history stretched across thousands of pages. 8 years of positive evaluations, 8 years of productivity reports, 8 years of specialized certifications and documented experience. The worker had spent nearly a decade generating profit for the company. Every available record described a valuable asset. Then, immediately beside those records, sat a report calmly suggesting replacement might be cheaper. Voltra had reviewed the calculations 6 times already. Each review only convinced her further that the analyst responsible should be prohibited from performing mathematics without supervision. The office door chimed softly before sliding open. Vexa stepped inside carrying a tablet beneath one arm. The nurse had long since learned to identify the difference between an annoyed Voltra and a dangerous Voltra. Annoyed Voltra complained. Dangerous Voltra became quiet. One version threw scalpels. The other scheduled meetings. Judging by the expression currently sitting on the doctor's face, Vexa immediately suspected she was about to spend the afternoon regretting something. Her eyes moved across the floating reports before settling on the personnel file. Recognition appeared almost immediately. Rose's file had remained open for most of the day. Vexa had noticed. Everyone in the hospital had probably noticed. Voltra was many things. Subtle had never been one of them. The nurse crossed the room and set the tablet on the desk before glancing back toward the collection of financial projections.
You've been reading that report for 3 hours.
She observed while pulling a chair away from the wall.
At this point, I'm beginning to suspect you're enjoying yourself.
Voltra looked up from the display and flattened her ears slightly. The movement carried enough offense to suggest Vexa had personally insulted her ancestors.
I am not enjoying myself. I am conducting research.
One claw tapped against the projection report, causing several charts to expand above the desk.
I wanted to determine whether a financial analyst could arrive at brain damage through entirely economic means. So far, the evidence is compelling.
Vexa settled into the chair and began reviewing the report herself. The longer she read, the more her expression shifted. Nothing in the document was obviously fraudulent. Nothing was obviously incorrect. The analyst had simply assembled a series of assumptions that produced the desired answer. Training expenses had been minimized. Productivity losses had been minimized. Replacement costs had been minimized. Every variable that might favor rehabilitation had quietly shrunk, while every variable favoring replacement remained untouched. By the time she reached the end, Vexa found herself sharing at least part of Voltra's irritation.
This isn't really an analysis.
She said while lowering the report.
It's a conclusion disguised as one.
The doctor's tail thumped once against the floor. Unlike the irritated movements from earlier, this one carried a strange note of satisfaction. Finding another creature willing to acknowledge reality always improved her mood.
Exactly. Rose spent 8 years generating profit, 8 years acquiring training, 8 years accumulating experience. Then somebody writes a report assuming a replacement worker appears from nowhere already qualified to do the same job.
Voltra gestured toward the projection.
The analyst has effectively solved the labor shortage problem by imagining it isn't real.
A notification appeared across the corner of the display before Vexa could respond. The nurse read it once and immediately understood why Voltra had been in such a good mood all morning. The representative from Kelvar Nutrient Systems had arrived. Several pieces of the day suddenly assembled themselves into a much larger and considerably more dangerous picture. Vexa slowly lowered the tablet. Voltra slowly smiled. Neither woman needed to explain what had happened. The doctor had scheduled a meeting. Several minutes later, the office door opened again. Director Halvek entered with the sort of confidence normally associated with creatures who had never met Dr. Voltra. The representative was a chimera, though not one built for physical labor. His coat was expensive. His feathers were immaculate. Gold trim decorated reinforced fabrics that looked designed to project authority rather than survive meaningful use. Every visible detail suggested status, education, and a career spent attending meetings. Voltra watched him cross the room and found herself immediately disappointed. She had hoped the company might send somebody interesting. The representative introduced himself while taking the offered seat. His posture remained relaxed. His smile remained professional. His voice carried the calm confidence of a creature accustomed to being listened to. Voltra found the entire presentation mildly irritating. Across the room, Vexa quietly relocated her chair several feet farther away. Experience suggested maintaining distance from both participants was the safest available strategy. A collection of holographic displays expanded across the office as the meeting began. Rose's personnel file appeared first. Productivity evaluations followed. Transportation records joined them. Medical reports appeared beside maintenance requests, while financial projections hovered near the center of the display. The office gradually filled with documentation until the floating reports resembled a small library. Halvek examined the collection with polite curiosity. What interested Voltra was how quickly he relaxed after seeing it. The representative clearly believed this meeting concerned paperwork.
Our company appreciates the hospital's efforts regarding treatment.
Halvek said while studying the reports.
Rose's survival was unexpected, but obviously welcome. Kelvar Nutrient Systems values productive workers and hopes to reach a reasonable solution regarding future rehabilitation costs.
Voltra listened quietly. The representative's words were perfectly polite. They were also almost entirely meaningless. She had heard similar statements from managers, executives, and administrators throughout her career. Every version sounded reasonable until somebody examined the numbers. The doctor activated another report and added it to the growing collection before finally speaking.
I've spent most of today reviewing your company's records. Rose appears in them quite frequently. Productivity reports describe her as valuable. Supervisor evaluations describe her as reliable. Certification records describe her as experienced. Every available document identifies a successful worker. Then I reach this report.
One claw tapped against the analyst's projection.
Suddenly, everyone begins discussing replacement.
Halvek glanced toward the report and immediately recognized it. A brief flicker of annoyance crossed his face before disappearing behind practiced professionalism. The reaction interested Voltra far more than anything he had said so far. Most representatives became defensive when their paperwork was questioned. Halvek looked tired.
I assume you disagree with the conclusion.
Voltra stared at him for several seconds. Vexa recognized the expression immediately. The doctor wasn't angry. She was offended. There was a difference. Anger tended to burn itself out. Offense could last for years.
Disagree is an interesting word.
Voltra replied while opening another collection of reports.
If somebody informed me gravity was optional, I would not describe myself as disagreeing. I would describe myself as concerned.
The representative exhaled slowly through his nose. Not dramatically. Not defensively. Simply the exhausted reaction of a creature encountering a familiar problem.
The analyst believes rehabilitation may exceed future value generation.
The analyst is an idiot.
Halvek's eyes closed briefly. The movement lasted less than a second, but it told Voltra everything she needed to know. The representative had heard this argument before. More importantly, he had probably made it himself. The realization shifted her understanding of the conversation almost immediately. She had expected arrogance. She had expected excuses. Instead, she was looking at another employee trapped inside the same bureaucracy. The discussion continued for nearly an hour. Productivity reports appeared, financial projections appeared, training costs, replacement costs, transportation expenses, and projected labor shortages all joined the growing pile of evidence. By the end of the conversation, one fact had become painfully obvious. Rose was valuable, not potentially valuable, not theoretically valuable, valuable. Every available record supported the conclusion. The company knew it, the supervisors knew it, even Halvek knew it. Somewhere between those facts and the analyst's report, reality had simply stopped participating. What fascinated Voltra was how often Rose's name kept appearing. Every document seemed to reveal another qualification, another certification, another example of strong performance. The worker had spent years proving her worth, yet every conversation surrounding her future seemed determined to ignore that fact. By the time the final report disappeared from the display, Voltra found herself more irritated than when the meeting began. The representative sat quietly for several moments before speaking again. The confidence he had arrived with had largely disappeared by then.
The company will approve the treatment plan. I'll authorize the rehabilitation expenses personally if necessary. Frankly, keeping her alive is probably cheaper than continuing this conversation.
Voltra considered the statement. It was intended as a joke. Unfortunately, it was also correct. The office grew quiet. Reports continued floating through the air. Somewhere beyond the walls of the hospital, Rose remained unconscious in a recovery ward, completely unaware that an afternoon had been spent arguing over her future. The thought lingered longer than it should have. Voltra found herself studying the personnel file again. 8 years. The number kept returning. 8 years of experience, 8 years of investment, 8 years of accumulated value. Every time somebody suggested replacement, the doctor found herself becoming more annoyed. Eventually, a different question entered her mind. The realization was irritating enough that she almost ignored it. Instead, she looked toward Halvek. The representative was already gathering his documents when Voltra spoke again.
Out of curiosity,
She said while opening another section of the personnel file.
what would it cost?
Halvek paused. The movement was immediate. Every other conversation in the room stopped existing. Voltra noticed the reaction. So did Vexa. Neither of them said anything. The representative slowly looked up from the reports and asked.
I'm sorry.
Voltra's eyes remained fixed on the personnel file. Her expression suggested she was still reviewing documentation rather than asking an important question.
The worker, what would it cost to purchase her?